Hello, I'm Robert. Welcome to my channel, and well, I help people scared of many things. And I'm talking about COVID. I've been following COVID since January 2020 because people in our Facebook group Doomsday Debunked were already worrying about COVID before the Wuhan lockdown, and I've been listening to all the World Health Organization press briefings ever since in order to help them. Anyway, this is just to give you a bit of background of what's happening with the task of tracing the origins of COVID back. So nowadays, the Wuhan is seen as a superspreader event. And it's definitely not thought to originate in the virology lab. That's not thought to be likely at all. I'll explain why. It's just a coincidence that the lab was close by, and not that much of a coincidence, since of course China is was very hard hit by SARS, and so they've got people looking into it. And well, actually, the interesting thing is, I mean, it's not even clear. You may have heard the news of people saying, "Oh, China is blaming the United States." They have actually got a point. That it's not actually clear that it did start in China. It probably did, but it's not certain, as we'll see in a minute. Because the reason that China picked it up in Wuhan is because they were so alert because of their previous experience of SARS. And doctors in the United States missed it. In February and March, then they didn't notice anything, and yet it's certain that the United States had much worse outbreaks than in Wuhan, because suddenly they were hit with all these cases in New York, and they didn't know where they'd come from. So that was a little bit like Wuhan, but without them noticing the start of the outbreak. The China, bearing in mind they didn't have a genetic sequence, they were just going by symptoms, unusual cluster of pneumonia symptoms in the middle of their flu season, in the middle of winter. Then the doctors there, the epidemiologists, and it was an automatic pneumonia searching for SARS and SARS-like diseases. They had an automatic surveillance system which picked it up, and the doctors noticed it just a day before the automatic system. And that whole thing about whistleblowers, that led to China having its first ever laws on medical whistleblowers. What has happened there is not going to happen again, because if a whistleblower does say that something medical, then if it turns out that what they said is true, they will not be disciplined. So China, as a result, has for the first time put whistleblower laws very limited, only for medical situations, but they now have medical whistleblower laws. That's not often publicized, but that has happened. And so the thing is that we can now detect cases from before we knew it was there. And one of the most interesting ways of doing this is because there are lots of samples of sewage around the world. They check the sewage from time to time, and they keep those samples for comparisons. And going back to ancient samples of sewage, they have found PCR, they have found the virus in it. So they don't know who was infected, but someone in that region must have had it. And this is PCR test, not the serology, not looking for antibodies, but looking for the actual gene sequence. There isn't really any possibility of a false positive except by cross-contamination with PCR done carefully and double-checked. And so this is a summary of what we'll I'll come back to that summary in a bit. So let's have a look at this. So the earliest cases in China go back to the 17th of November. So back before the first case in December. So the first case in December was an elderly man who suffered from Alzheimer's disease, and he lived 4 or 5 buses from the seafood market, and because he was sick, he basically didn't go out. they don't know how he got it, but not from the seafood market. So it's pretty clear it's nothing to do with the seafood market or the Virology Institute. It's very hard to know how this chap actually got it. And that will be one of the things that the team are looking for in China, looking how did this elderly man get COVID. So that's what they will be doing. Going back to and then there was a 55-year-old man from November the 17th. They haven't released details about him apart from his age, but the team will doubtless will have more information, and so they will try and find out where did that chap get it from. Well, there were actually early cases around the world. First of all, an early case in France from December 27. That's a very clear case. That was a fishmonger, and his wife works in a retail shop near the airport. So it's possible that he got it from his wife from travellers from China. So that could be connected to the Wuhan outbreak. And then the sewage samples from Italy, from Milan and Turin, from the 18th of December. And those are really quite far apart. And that suggests it had time to spread for a while in Italy. Those are sewage samples, not an actual case. So they don't have actual cases yet from Italy, but they know it was there from the sewage. And now, really intriguing, Brazil found it even earlier, 27th of November, and 2 independent sewage samples. That's the second largest city in Santa Catarina. And those actual detections of the gene sequence. So that's only 10 days after the earliest case known in China. And if it's in the sewage, I mean, very likely it was around for a little bit before the 27th of November. So how did it get to Brazil from China as quickly as 27th of November? But there are even earlier, even more mysterious ones. So this is not so conclusive because this is antibodies in the blood. And you can get antibodies to a protein that maybe was expressed by something else and happens to coincidentally also be an antibody to COVID-19. So that's the big question there. But they've looked at these antibodies and they're quite robust and they don't really look like accidental antibodies. So there are 4 cases positive for antibodies from Italy. So first of all, this is blood samples of actual blood donations from in United States, December 13th to 16th. Then people were donating blood and they had antibodies to COVID in their blood. And then there are 4 cases like that from Italy in the first week of October. And then there were higher than usual cases of severe pneumonia and flu in Lombardy in last quarter of 2019. So if Italy had had as good a surveillance system as China, they might well have picked it up. Maybe, but if you go and look further down, where was it? Have I missed it somehow? Yes, I may have missed out the. I have to find it and link it back in. But there are examples of antibodies from Italy from September as well. And if I seem to have left that out somehow, and this is a different section. So yeah, I'll have to look that up. And let me just pause this a minute, and I'll find the antibodies from Italy from September. Yes, that was that link. I just haven't summarised it properly. They could have been circulating from Italy in September 2019. So yes, that was that actual one. I just haven't summarised it properly in my. That's that one. There were higher than usual cases of severe pneumonia, and there was also antibodies going back to September. So it's possible that if Italy had the same disease surveillance as China has, they might have detected in Italy as early as September. Because those severe pneumonias and flu, the Chinese system would probably have picked that up as a possible outbreak, and they'd have started investigating it. So it's not impossible. We don't know. It's not certain. These are suggestive, but less conclusive. That's how I summarised it. So it's possible that it actually was circulating in Italy much earlier in September. Now, the antibodies, Brazil has antibodies in one case from December 18, and US back December 13 to 16. And so it's about 20 days to get the antibodies, so it was likely it was in Brazil already by late November or late December, and in the US by November, and by, again, the antibody suggests Italy as early as September. Yes, that was September, October. Oh, that's it. 4 cases positive from Italy in October. That means that because those were antibodies, that means that Italy had it, probably had cases in September. And that was, the symptoms started in September, so infected, and again, maybe 5 days before then. So China really, they've got a lot of bad press for suggesting it could have originated in the United States. Well, they should really have said Italy or Brazil would have been there. It's perhaps unfortunate that they focused on the United States, because the evidence isn't that strong for the United States for it being quite so early, but it could have been in the United States by November. And it could have been Italy or Brazil, and Italy could have been as early as September. And these, and then the many other countries between China and Italy. And the reason it's not detected there yet is probably just because they have less data. So this leads to the idea that perhaps it has been around the world for months, and so that's what the Chinese, the World Health Organization, looking at the hypothesis that it has been around in the world possibly for months or even years before, for some reason, it started to spread as a pandemic. They haven't said why. We'll get their big report soon, but an obvious hypothesis is that just as we've got new variants that have made it more transmissible, perhaps there was a new variant that made it more transmissible in Wuhan. So it's maybe been around at a very low level and just not spreading very far and fizzling out, and maybe it crossed to humans multiple times from whatever the animal source is, which we don't know yet, and it just fizzles out. That's what happens with avian flu, and it keeps jumping to humans and it never spreads to anyone else. It almost never spreads avian flu. It just comes directly from the chickens to the humans, and that's it. Well, perhaps COVID was like that as well, and it's been like that for years, and it's just been jumped to humans and spread just a little bit. And so perhaps the last little bit of the change, because usually these viruses change quite a lot once they go into humans. This has not changed very much. People are surprised by the new variants, but the experts, it's more, they look and they see this virus has hardly changed at all since January 2020, and that's quite unusual. So it might be that that's because it's already adapted to humans by January 2020, and it's been around for years, and then it finally made the jump. So now we know that it didn't go directly. It's pretty certain that that most of its evolution happened first of all in bats. We know it's closely related to a bat virus. So if I go up to this one, there's a very, very close relative there. There's COVID-19, and it's a very, very close relative in bats. And that one is in a bat, very close relative. And it's split from that one about between 1948 and 1982. And then for pangolin, it's back about 1860. And then SARS, and then another... wait a minute. One pangolin back, it's 1860. For other pangolin viruses, it's more like about 1550. And then with SARS, the common ancestor goes back to around 1200. Now, this is not because they obviously didn't have samples going back and back and back. We don't have any samples preserved. Viruses don't last in archaeological digs or anything like that. So the way they work this out is by looking at the speed at which these coronaviruses are evolving, and then looking at how different they are from each other, and from that you can estimate how far back it crossed over, how far back they separated from each other. So they think it's about 1200 that SARS separated from COVID-19, year 1200. So that's however many centuries ago, eight centuries ago. So so it's, and then you might think that, oh, okay, it's so close to a bat virus, so therefore it must have jumped from a bat directly to humans. But it seems it's probably spent some time, so some decades perhaps, in some other animal. And the reason they do that is because of a thing called the codon bias. I think I have a little bit about that somewhere here. Where did I talk about codon virus? There we are, codon bias. So, yeah, let's just bring that up. So, the codon, this is a codon table, and this is the three digits of the triplet that codes for a particular amino acid. So that one plus that one plus that one codes for that. But so does that, and so does that. And so you have multiple codings for the same amino acid. And so I give an example there. For instance, serine has UCU, UCC, UCA, and UCG. I'm not sure if I used the right one there. I should be using the one for RNA, the RNA codon table there, because there's a slightly different one for DNA. And so there's the, let's see where we go. RNA codon table, inverse RNA codon table, the DNA codon table. So I'm not an expert on these things, but these little groups of three, UCU, it goes through a particular kind of cellular machine called a ribosome, which turns that into an amino acid, and then that builds up to make the protein spikes, or protein whatever it is. The ribosome isn't in the virus, it's in the cell, and the virus hijacks the cell processes to make the amino acid. So it just so turns out that as you move, as a virus replicates over and over and over in an animal, then it can make little changes in its RNA, and if those changes make no difference to how the virus functions, it keeps them. Well, the changes that happen just by chance, they are different depending on whether it's in a bat or human or some other animal. The random changes that happen differently in different animals. And these random substitutions. So by looking at the substitutions that have happened in the way that the virus has changed from its closest relatives, then they deduce that it has spent some time in an animal that is not human and not a bat. So that is why they're pretty certain it can't have jumped directly from the virology lab to a human, because it wouldn't have this particular fingerprint of the changes in the gene sequence of the codons. It's called a codon bias. A little triplet of three is called a codon. A codon bias is that they use particular codons instead of other ones. I don't know the actual examples. Might be, for instance, it tends to use the UCU instead of UCC or something, to code for serine. So I mean, I'm not that astro. I'm not an microbiologist or anything. Not a virologist or anything like that. So I'm bound. I don't want to try to give an actual example, except if I stop and look it up and find what the actual codon bias was for the particular virus. But it has a codon bias which is not human and not bat-like, not human-like and not bat-like, So it seems to have circulated in another animal. At first they thought a snake, but it's not really snake-like. It tends to be closest to a pangolin, but it's not quite pangolin-like either. So that's why they're puzzled. And so the big puzzle is, what animal has this virus been spending time in, slowly changing its gene sequence in these inessential ways? But the same codon, a different codon expressing the same amino acid, is the protein. The virus will work just exactly the same way in the body, but it's a slightly different genetic code. So that, just a second. I just had a bit of a sneeze, didn't want to interrupt the recording. So there's some evidence that it's closest to a pangolin, but it's not quite a pangolin either. Maybe it is a pangolin, it's a bit strange. So that's what they're looking for. So now, so again, it could be one. It could be that it crosses even to different animals. It's crossed to this animal, and then from this animal, it's come to humans several different times. For instance, we know it circulates in minks. So who knows? Maybe, I don't know if they've looked into whether it could be a mink, but presumably I haven't heard any news saying, oh, it's got the coronavirus for minks, so I assume it's not a mink. But some animal or other it's spent some time in. So now there's one other key to this puzzle, is that there was a misuse disease from China in 2012, and the symptoms very closely resemble COVID. Unfortunately, there don't seem to be any samples, but maybe there are, and maybe they'll be able to find these samples. But they were 6 miners clearing up a mine shaft of bat feces in 2012, and that had all the symptoms the same to a remarkable degree: need for ventilation, oxygen failure, ground glass opacities in the lungs, bilateral, both lungs the same, a high fever, continuous cough. It doesn't mean it was COVID, not the modern version for sure, because it didn't spread far, and and was very deadly, with half of the miners dying, and some of them were quite young. So that doesn't look like COVID. It was far too deadly and didn't spread very far. But who knows? Maybe that's a close relative to COVID. And so you can see from this that they have a really very difficult task in front of them to try to, what do all these things mean? It's one of these bizarre, I've just been watching, what's it called, Jonathan Creek. This is a very bizarre detective puzzles, where detective mysteries, where the result can be quite surprising. And it's very like that. They can't know in advance what they're going to find. They're going to China because the way you always start the investigation at the patient zero, which is in China. The earliest known patient, the French known patient, is later, and the Italy one is just not conclusive enough. So the earliest known patient is in China, so that's where they're starting. But their investigation could lead them anywhere, and they said that it may well be that it has been circulating for years. And in that case, it wouldn't really originate in China. Or it might be circulating for years in China, but perhaps it's been circulating for years throughout the world, in just little outbreaks from time to time. That could explain this very strange pattern. Why would there be such early cases in Brazil and in Italy? Perhaps if they go further back, they can find even earlier cases. Or maybe it's been circulating for years and months at least. I think it's circulating for months at least. Maybe it's even been circulating for months and years in China and hasn't spread very far beyond China. So there are many different possibilities. They don't know what they're going to find. And so that's really what I want to do with this video. Just want to make it clear that they're not likely to find an answer. You can see from this it's immensely complicated, very difficult. The report will just be a basic report. We don't expect them to find an answer and to say, that's where it came from. But they may be able to clear up some of the mysteries, and then they probably answer many more questions. And the World Health Organization always do a report, and we expect a report. They'll be working on the report during and also at the end of their mission in China. Then they will do a report on the origins of COVID, and then we can learn a bit more from it. But there's so many very different puzzles from around the world. It's going to take a long time to piece all this together, except for some very lucky break. And they're probably, for instance, going to have to start researching into bats in bat caves, but they've also got the big search to try and find the animal host. And that's not going to be easy, because there's so many different animals in China, including so many that are used domestically and sold for meat. And it could be any of those. Well, not any of, there'll be some they can rule out. But so it's going to be really quite a difficult, quite a complex investigation. It doesn't seem to have originated in the Wuhan wet library. It may not even have originated in Wuhan or even in Hubei province. We just don't know yet. And it's not even certain that it originated in China. They would not say that it's certain it originated in China. So China did have a point, but particularly pointing the finger at the United States, no way that they can know something like that. But all countries should be looking to try and find, looking at very early sewage samples and checking them for PCR, and then looking also for any samples they preserve in hospitals from diseases, from especially unusual pneumonias, and also blood samples from blood donations. And around the world we need to look at these and test them for antibodies and for PCR tests for the sewage samples, and see if we can find out more about where it originated. Given that it got to Brazil, Italy, United States and France so early, it's probably got to many other countries in November and December and perhaps even in September in 2019. And that could help and learn where it came from, if we can piece together what connects together all these different detections of it. So anyway, I hope this helps you understand a bit better about the search for this virus in China. I'll upload this, and yes, welcome to the channel. Do subscribe and like, as usual thing, and if you want to hear more of these sort of things, and do check out my blog. And then also, if you're good at fact checking, then it's great help to people who are scared. Doomsday Debunked group, and do check the rules at the head of the group. And also, if you're scared, then we help people who are scared, and check the rules at the head of the group. And you can just join and then leave immediately. You can join and leave and rejoin again as often as you like. Some people like to just join to ask a question, because we get so many other people asking questions. I think you can get scared by the other questions there. Don't feel that you have to stay. If you're scared, you join the group, you need help. It's absolutely fine to leave as soon as you've had help, and then just come back again. And you can also contact any of the debunkers by private message if you don't want to talk in the group itself. And we also have a closed group which isn't public, and that can be useful for some people as well. Anyway, upload this now.